Miss Yulia.
Miss
Teacher,
Yulia.
no good. Say lecturer.
Lecturer.
Right? Not professional. Lecturer.
Lecturer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
hello everyone, my name is Shinus. So, this is our third podcast that with Miss Yulia. She is my lecturer teaching strategy and business. So, she's doing the PhD for Uzbekistan youth people, how they can do their businesses, how to do startups, start small. And we're going to talk about all about how like young people can start their businesses. So can you introduce yourself first, like education?
All right, good to see you, Sharnus. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased, right? So my name is Yulia Paramanova. I'm a senior lecturer at MDIST in Tashkent. And indeed, one of my research focus areas is innovation and entrepreneurship. And in particular now, I am focusing on researching how youth entrepreneurship can be motivated here in Uzbekistan to start up their own small companies, right? So we know that entrepreneurship has been of major importance for developing countries around the world, and in particular in Uzbekistan nowadays, the government and the president pay a particular attention of spurring entrepreneurial ventures, entrepreneurial activities, and we still do have a lot of barriers here, but my aim is to identify how we can try to help these students, this youth entrepreneurship, those people that just graduate, to start their businesses small, right? So how we can actually use some of the techniques and tools to try to alleviate those barriers, to overcome those barriers, right? To entrepreneurship. So this is my area of concern, and research that I'm currently conducting is about this.
That's so cool. So next question is like, what's your experience? How did you like your studies? Like, where did you study? Like,
all right. Well, I have had an experience of studying both here in Uzbekistan locally. I did travel to study in college and Whittier College in the USA, and my study ranges from the political science, international relations, and then moving on to business. I graduated from AMI BM program here at Westminster University. So it's basically administration and management. And from that point on, I focused on the area of business and then moved on to entrepreneurship and innovative development, innovation management, and so forth, right? So this is I had a few of the industry experience, and I work for the investment committee here in Uzbekistan that has been created by the President Shavkat Mirziyoyev in 2017. And we dealt with attracting foreign direct investment into Uzbekistan. And I did have the experience of starting my own business with a friend of mine here in Uzbekistan as well. And so I basically had some first-hand experience of the difficulties that the young entrepreneurs may face when launching the company, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them obviously refer to having lack of access to funds, to money, right? But there's plenty of other obstacles which are as important and could be dealt with, aside from the monetary issues.
Exactly. So can we focus on the questions that most of young entrepreneurs and students planning they have good ideas and plans? Like, I heard like many people have in their lifetime has like 10 or 5 good business ideas, but they never can do it because of lack of resources or lack of discipline. So how can young entrepreneurs or students have good ideas can follow their dreams and do something to not only like businesses, also like social impact?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, indeed, right? The thing is that ideas actually itself is not worth that much, right? Although we know a lot of students, and I've had the experience of conducting surveys, and many believe if they have a great idea, that's it, right? So some of those students were actually quite shy and quite scary to share those ideas, believing that they will be stolen away from them. But the idea itself is not worth anything unless you're able to exploit it, right? Unless you're able to bring it into a live project. So that indeed requires not only access to funds, right, but also a lot of other elements. So I want to focus on how you start small, because many researches that I've conducted here at the MDIS with local students in Uzbekistan as well, many decide that their access to funds is one of the major problems right? But however, when I asked them about, when I put the question differently and I said, so imagine if you have the funds required today, would you start your business tomorrow, right? And many would say, well, yes, not that many said actually, yes, we would, right? Many said that we still have some issues, we have to settle down, some issues we have to resolve, because indeed, it's not only about the money. Money, if you have a great idea, if you have passion, if you have the perseverance, right, and determinedness, it's not the most difficult thing to acquire. Because nowadays you can start small. We've all heard about the lean startup thing, right? By Eric Rice, probably, the book by Eric Rice. But the movement itself has started quite a long time before the Eric Rice had written the book itself, right? He was the originator of the movement, which talks about how you start small. And for that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to invest a lot of money. Right? If we refer to starting small, is that getting access to small funds is quite attainable for many students. It's using the savings, personal savings. It's going to work for a cafeteria, for a restaurant, and actually making some money and saving it, right? Could be other ways where you can save a small amount of money or borrow it from your family or friends. I'm sure if you bring them a great idea and explain the idea, right? You have a small business plan that you can actually present to your family or friends. I'm sure they'll be willing to lend you money for that, right? So companies, these young entrepreneurs, they can easily use this bootstrapping when they start small, right? Bootstrapping implies that you find the means of how to start very small. Instead of, committing large resources up front, you iterate by small steps. The thing is with many of the ideas that I've heard from the students is that no one has ever tested these ideas, right? And they're not even trying to test them, while the lean startup movement tells us that it's great to understand the market need, right? If your idea has actually a market appeal. Well, in simple terms, whether the customers want which you have to offer to them, right? So how do we do this? For this, there's no need to invest a lot of money in research and development and building the perfect product. But there's a great concept which is called MVP, the one that you constantly use, right? Building a minimum viable product. Basically, the product, sometimes it is called a prototype, something very easily assembled that doesn't require the commitment of large resources up front. You build it, right? And then you test it on your customers. Your customers could be your friends at universities, your family members, right? So anyone out there that is willing to provide the feedback of what they think about the product. Not only the verbal feedback, right, whether they like it or not, whether they will be using or not. Sometimes they can be quite, biased in this because of their friends and families. They may give you wrong feedback, being a bit, they are flattering, supportive of you. But, if you observe the way they interact with your product, that's also great feedback for you, right? Whether they have difficulties of using the product, whether, whether they actually like it in the form of, how they would use it or not. So you can get an invaluable feedback there as well. And from this point on, if you see that there's a market appeal, if you see that your customers would love the product, at least the product actually solves some issues for them, right? Because many of the students, many of the people I've encountered, in many instances, they forget that a successful product is the product that solves problems, right, for customers, right? That it satisfies some customers' needs or solves problems for them. So in this way, we can say that the market validated your product, right? So once you get your validation, you can then continue to invest more of your funds, right? And again, how would you do that? When you have the market validation, it'll be much easier for you to come to your friends, your acquaintances, or even investors, right? We have quite a few investors here in the marketplace, right? And you come to them not with just an idea, because I have mentioned before, idea itself is not worth anything unless you can validate it. But this market validation, which doesn't require a lot of expenses from you, right? But this market validation is a great proof for investors, for potential investors, that your idea is worth anything, right? Mm-hmm. That is actually, there's a market appeal. Customers want it, they need this product because it solves certain problems for them. So with this validation, you can easily approach investors, you can easily approach your family members, your acquaintances, your, now we even have a few programs here in Uzbekistan that deal specifically with helping out young entrepreneurs, right? One of them is at the Ministry of Innovation, right? One project there. So basically, when you have your market validation, it'll be much easier for you to get access to funds.
We got it, like how get money and validate our ideas, first MVP, and then what should we do?
Okay, so once you get the validation of your idea, and I believe that's one of the most important elements in getting things done, basically, right? So how do we launch this? How do we get things running? Validating your idea, and then once you validate your idea, obviously you need to have some people, the networks, right, that will help you out to get this idea going. And again, if we lack resources, right, most of the time, these young entrepreneurs, they do not have access to resources to hire the best experts, the best managers to work for them. So the good thing to get around there is that to get your friends involved, right? And here, you don't need to pay them money once and for all. You can start by encouraging them and inspiring them with this idea, and also telling them that here, the validation is there, right? I've proven the idea, it's working, right? So what I need from you is your skills and capabilities. Because actually the lack of skills and capabilities has also been mentioned by many of the students as one of the major reasons why they don't start their projects, right? Because as I've mentioned, right, when they have been offered the opportunity to have the funds ready, and they have been asked whether you would start tomorrow, many have said, well, we still have a lot of issues to settle down, because the problem of self-confidence and lack of skills and capabilities required to start is one of the major barriers for youth entrepreneurs, right? And here, to overcome this obstacle is to get into the network of people, right? People with enough skills, capabilities, maybe some experience, and to get them involved by inspiring them with your idea and by showing them the validation of your idea. The validation is there. It's a good idea. It's a working idea, right? It's not just, something I imagine, I think it's going to be great. The thing is with many entrepreneurs, they believe that their idea is going to be great. Well, that's my idea. It's going to work no matter what. Over-optimism is there. Yeah. So validation gives you like a grounded understanding of why idea is actually worth something, right? So you can prove it to your friends, family, your people, your network members, right? That you want to get involved into the project, that the idea got validated. It's not just my own thoughts, my own imagination. It's just what people said about the product, right? They like it because of this, and that, and it solves a problem for them. That's great. So there you involve people who have this complementary skills. I do believe personally that the team of a startup team should consist of people who have complementary skills that add on each other's capabilities, right? So if I'm good at market research, if I'm good at understanding market needs, right? So I need someone who's good at IT, for example, right? Like you, a developer. That would be great. If I would be to start the business now, I would probably look for someone who's great at web development, right? So instead of paying those other guys, those web developers elsewhere, I'd lure in someone who knows web development, who knows coding, and would attract this person to work for me as a team, right? With being ready not to be paid up front, right? Co-founder? Yes, co-funding, so building partnerships with people, right? Some people would be quite encouraged, especially if you have an interesting project, right? Something new for them, something that they would also pose some challenges for them as professionals. I'm sure everyone would love to participate in this type of project for future potential returns, like co-founder or some other promised dividends from the project itself. Especially young coders, right? That they would be happy to get involved in the project, that that they can test their own knowledge and skills. So the key here is to find people with complementary skills and capabilities, right? So with you, the coder, the great asset to your company, for example, would be someone who knows the market, right? So a market-sided specialist, because the knowledge of the market nowadays is of critical importance. So previously we had companies who were driven by a technology push innovation, right? Where companies would invest in research and development, would create a product, and then would try to persuade the customers of the benefits of this product, why they need it, what benefits it could get them, and so forth. Nowadays, it doesn't work quite efficiently, this approach. A better approach is actually to have either the market pull approach to innovation or to bring in the new products to the marketplace, or the combined one. So when you, instead of focusing on building something and then trying to persuade your customers, they love it, you actually go from the opposite, from the market side. You try to understand the customer pains. The pains the customers are suffering, or the gap in the marketplace where the customers are not being served, right? And then you try to fulfill the gap with your offering, your service, your product, right? So this is how many of the successful products came to be. Even, if we think of the iPod, one great example I usually use with my students, Steve Jobs was a great market guru, right? He was not probably a great tech guy, but he was a great market guru, and he knew the pains of the market. So he said why we were so successful with iPod is that we at Apple have been music lovers ourselves, right? We're quite devoted music lovers. So we knew what pains the music lovers were facing with these bulky, multi MP3 players. You could not put them in the pocket. They were too heavy to carry around, and they could only carry about 50 songs, right, that you could accommodate into a CD. So he said we found a solution for them with the iPod. It was sleek, you could fit it even into your front pocket. It would carry around 1,000 songs and more. So the design was, unique and modern. So there was solving the customer's problem out there. So finding the person who is a market guru in your team is a great tool, right? Is a great asset. So if you're a coder, to any coders out there, if you want to form a team, find someone who's great at understanding the market needs. Financials are important, right? So you also have to find someone who's great at financials if you're not yourself. So therefore, one of the great ways is to do bootstrapping. Instead of, hiring those people, try to inspire them with your idea, right? Try to persuade them that their idea is validated, it's working. So, once you get into it for free in the first few months, but the returns will follow, right? So I'm sure a lot of people are willing to wait for some returns if they believe in the idea. So here, the entrepreneurial task is to inspire people with the idea, right? To make sure he or she is able to explain the benefits and to explain how the idea is going to work. And here's the validation. Once you get the validation, everything else will be much easier, right?
Validation, you mean like when you go to market, like people like it or not?
Right. Basically, we like the within the lean startup, the validation itself, the validated learning is when you get certain feedback and you learn on that, right? But there's also a build, measure, learn loop, right? So what you do is you build an MVP, right? That's one of the most critical elements of the lean startup movement, right? So you start by building the MVP, then you go out and test this MVP on customers, right? So the customer base could be quite broad, not only your acquaintances and friends and family, but quite broader. You go out there and you test your product. It could be not only a technological product, it could be any type of offering, right? So if you want, say, to sell a different taste of coffee, right? So instead of just opening, investing a lot of money in opening the coffee shop, doing a great design there, doing the advertisements and then figure it out that no one really likes the taste, the simplest thing would be to place a small coffee booth in, say, at the university, right? So I'm sure you can strike a deal with your, deans and with the rectors. So it's not that difficult, right? To persuade people to allow you to set the booth for free, especially if you're a student of this university. And then test this coffee, right? The simplest thing to do is to test this coffee on the customers. If you see customers love it, your booth always has the line, everyone loves the coffee, loves the serving, or whatever the offering is. Doesn't necessarily have to be a coffee, just an example. And then you see that the idea has been validated, right? So you know that there will be a demand for your product in the marketplace. So you can go out by trying to test small, right? As opposed to committing large resources upfront, and then understanding that no one really likes the idea, no one really likes your product or service offering. So here, getting the validation through the build, measure, learn loop, right? So how do we do on the simplest example, coffee? So you build your coffee recipe, right? You build a small booth, like it doesn't cost you much, like a few $100s. You place it in the university, you sell it to customers, and you learn from the feedback. Not only the way their explicit feedback, right? But the way they buy your coffee. If they buy it, en masse, quite often, there's a great line. So you see they're liking it, right? But if a few people say, yes, it's the best coffee in the world, but tomorrow they never return, you understand they didn't really like it, right? So you get validation, and some people could say, well, we love it, but we think you should add this, or this is too much, Give you some suggestions. You act on these suggestions. You act on this feedback. You amend your offering and offer it again and test the market again. So basically you learn from the feedback, you reiterate, right? You amend some features, your product offering, the way the product looks or feels, and you test the market again. And through this, you learn and you get the perfect product, right? You get the idea of how the product actually should be and what works best for your customers, right? For your market. And then you invest money into building this right product, right? Then you have the validation, understanding that if I invest in this, if now I build a larger coffee booth elsewhere, people will like it, right? Basically. So now I'm not that scared. So through this build and measure, learn loop, you try to reduce the possible risks, right? We know that startups are associated with high levels of risk. This is why, by the way, many of these young entrepreneurs are scared to launch their businesses because they're afraid of risk, right? You commit even $5,000, you commit and you forget about them, right? So it might never be a success story. And we know that in reality, indeed, many of the startups, they fail, right? Like 90% of the startups, they fail. That's indeed a huge number. So the risks are there. And I do understand young people who are afraid to invest. So therefore, getting validation is important. Instead of committing resources, you try to validate and thus reduce the risk. There's a great connection there. The validation brings you the reduction of risks and uncertainty. You get more certain about what's going to happen next, right? The customers love it, they like it, but they wanted some amendments, some changes in the product offering. You did this, and now they like it even better, right? So the feedbacks are better, the behaviors is better towards your product. So there's a validation there. They're actually needing this product, right? So then you assemble the team of like-minders, people who are willing to work for free, right? But for the idea of having things done. A lot of people in the students community are this, right? Some have enough time, some love challenges to overcome. For the coders, to create something new, that would be a great challenge that I'm sure everyone would be willing to participate, right? So you assemble a team of like-minded people, but what's more important, you also have to master a network of people who will support your idea, your project. The people in them, the experts, the lecturers and the teachers, right, who might help you out with some, valuable advice once in a while. That's also important, right? Experts in the field, depending on what industry you're in, right? So talking to people who had the experience in doing something similar, not necessarily the same, but something similar, launching out, even failing is a great tool to talk to people who even failed in this, because through failing, they have acquired knowledge, right? This is why it's important for us not to look at failure as something of vital, doom, but to look at the failure as the process of learning, validated learning, right? So we know how not to do next time. So people who have failed before, if you ask them for advice, they will tell you what not to do, basically, right? So, which mistakes to avoid, not to get into the same traps they had gotten into, right? So the thing is to get the network of people who will help you out to get your idea going. People who will help you out to do their SMM for free, right? Even now, it's not a big deal for all of us to go and learn ourselves how to do SMM. There's no need to pay to other companies for that, right? There's so much access nowadays for this free websites, for a free educational platform, which allows us to get acquainted of how to do SMM, how to do social media marketing and everything else, right? And we can do it by ourselves, and that's also do a bootstrapping, eliminate unnecessary costs associated with running the company. What else? Instead of renting the office, right? We don't need the office nowadays. The office is our computer, so we can have the office in the cafeteria. If it's nice weather outside, we can have it in the park, on the bench as well, right? So it's And we even have the co-working spaces. You know, once we want to get in a more official, more working mood, right? We can go into the co-working spaces, which doesn't cost that much. So bootstrapping implies not to committing large resources up front, but trying to go about with whatever we have. And I'm sure, you know, young entrepreneurs can always go work, as I mentioned, as waiters, as couriers, right? What are the possible jobs that probably don't require you to commit a lot of time to that, right? So you can still have some spare time for doing and focusing on your project, but also getting some money on the side, which can help pay your bills, like, you know, on a regular.
Like not focusing only on the idea, but also working for a living, right?
Well, the thing is that if you're able to focus on the idea and have some funds on the side that can pay out your bills, you know, your regular bills, that's great, right? So the more focused you are, the more efficient you will be. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs have actually started out by working on a side business as well, just making some money to pay out those small bills that they still have, right? I think that's one of the way to go about it, especially if we were asking that, where do we take money? You know, when I did many of those surveys through my, you know, students on the project cost, you can't imagine the project costs were quite small. You know, some required only $2,000 for the project. Some required $3,000 for the project. That's not the largest amount of money, right? So I'm sure if you work on the side and you save, right? So well, with the help of your family and friends sometimes, right? I'm sure you can master that amount of money. That's not always the matter of 20,000 or hundred thousands of dollars. It's a matter of a few hundreds. Right? So this is why we're now trying to think of creating this crowdsourcing or crowdfunding platform, which would allow the entrepreneurs to get access to this really small amounts of money. Because indeed, it's not that difficult, right? And here, one of the ways to go around is just to work on the side, right? To make some money, change it. All of the students pretty much live with their families, right? So they can use this money made from side working on investing this into the projects, right? So this is the case of how you get access to money, how you bootstrap instead of renting out expensively, buying expensive equipment, you know, hiring personnel. You just hire the like-minded people who are willing to take challenges, right? Who are willing to try something new and who are ready to work for the future returns rather than focus on the short-term gains today, right? So I'm sure you can find people like this, especially in the university communities, a lot of friends and acquaintances that you meet here. And the task of many of the universities nowadays is to create the environment where students could, you know, meet each other, get into the network. Yeah, basically get into the network, get acquainted with those who would be interested to join up, and so forth, right? So this is one of the main tasks of each and every university nowadays in Uzbekistan, to create the environment where students will feel like they can get together, you know, share their ideas. The thing is with the ideas is what I think is also quite important, and that everyone in the innovative world talks about, is when you get together, you build up on each other's ideas, right? So instead of just thinking that your idea is so valuable that I will not share it, the best thing is to go out and share your ideas with as many people as possible, right? Because through this sharing of ideas and discussing of your ideas, you can build up on it. Some people will gather invaluable advice, get their opinion there. But some people can even, can think of, well, I have another idea. Should we just combine those two and it might work even better? We'll have a synergy effect there. So this is really important, right? To go out, have a network of people that you can share your ideas and build on each other's ideas. That's going to be even more productive. Okay, so what else?
Let's see. Very good questions and answers though. So let's talk about discipline.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
How to stick an idea until the finish, because most of people start their idea, they do, and they develop it, and along the way they stop, like, I don't know why, but let's...
Right, that's also a very good question, indeed, because many believe that entrepreneurship is about creativity, innovativeness, independence, doing whatever you want and so forth. But, even if we go back to Eric Rice's the Lean Startup, he talks about that entrepreneurship is also about the management, right? It's a bit a different approach to management, not this, this very old-fashioned traditional management with a lot of regulations and laws and prescriptions. However, it's also management, right? So management does require some discipline, obviously. But the thing is with the startups, from my personal experience and from what I've learned before, is that it's a bit a different discipline there. And the first and most important thing is that startup as entrepreneurs, they have to focus on the idea that they love, right? That they care about, and that they're very inspired by. So therefore, to stick with the discipline will be much easier task for them. If you go by something which you think may bring you monetary returns, but something you don't believe in, something you don't enjoy, something you don't like, it'd be very difficult to stick to the discipline and accomplish this, right? Money itself has never been a motivator for people. A lot of researches have been conducted which said money alone is not a great motivator. So if you're only going into this idea to make money, and you're not enjoying the process itself, basically, right? You will never succeed. So one most important thing is when you start the idea, make sure you find something that you truly enjoy, right? Something that you're passionate about. Then sticking to the discipline will be much easier for you as well. Another great tool is to prioritize the task, but not in terms of urgency. The old-fashioned way of prioritizing tasks was that you focus on something which has to be done immediately. The urgent tasks were prioritized. However, nowadays it is believed that it's much more efficient, right, to prioritize that task based on not on the urgency, but on the benefit it brings to your life overall. And the task could be prioritized based on this issue when we understand that, yes, it may not be the immediate task we need to do today, because if we don't do it, everything is going to fall apart. But if we don't do it today, right, in the future, we will not get the sustainable success in whatever we're trying to achieve, right? So many of these tasks have to be prioritized based on this principle. Instead of focusing on doing something which is urgent and sometimes quite meaningless, right, doesn't give us the great results, we should focus instead on something which may bring us long-term sustainable success. One good example is that, for example, if we take an example of a startup, right, one of the immediate urgent tasks could be, let's say you have to go out and pay the rent, for example, right? Although we know that it's an urgent task, for example, and you have to really go out and do that. However, probably in terms of priority, one of the most important tasks would be to go out today and try to build sustainable relationship with your suppliers, right? Because at the end of the day, this is what's going to get you into longer sustainable success. Building stronger relationship with your suppliers is of ultimate importance. Although people sometimes, forget about this, because if it's not urgent, it's not on the list today. So that means that I can completely forget about this, right? However, it is one of the critical elements of your company's success. Building relationship with people, right? Building relationship with customers as well, right? So imagine you have the two tasks. One is urgent, like you have some issues at work, right? Something has happened in the office place, or something has happened with your customers, right? So, or maybe it's not the urgent matter that you have to solve today, but your customer relationships are much more in higher priority than something of the urgent matter in the office, right? Related to, some disasters maybe in the office, right? Of course, they are emergent and they have to be dealt with, but the customer relationship is something that's going to get company going in the future, right? Something you have to continuously build on. So prioritizing tasks in terms of their, not immediate importance, but in terms of their priorities, in terms of their, long-term and sustainable effect on your company is critical to discipline yourself in sticking to those tasks, right? Not to forget about them. Because if you forget about those tasks, right, thinking that that they still have some time to do, you may fail actually, right? So discipline here is about choosing something that you truly like and enjoy and understand, of course, right? It's not advisable to go into any business idea unless you're very good. Well, unless you had some experience with it. Not necessarily that you worked in this industry, where we're talking about the young entrepreneurs like students, right? They never had that much of work experience before. But they've had experience in, for example, if I'm a tennis player, right? So I know this industry quite well. I play, I know, which rackets are good, what people love in this industry and so forth, right? If you are now doing coding, right? You study for this, but you go out and you talk with people in the coding community, you talk with people who study at the university. So this is your environment now. So you know quite a lot about this particular environment. It's best if you focus on this environment, something that you've acquainted yourself with.
Let's talk about the real action step we can do it if we have an idea or plan. I have one thought like e-learning application for Uzbekistan in order to show that education can be short and useful by written by people themselves. For example, students, like teachers, like small articles. How I can do action plan for this idea to the market.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that's one of the greatest ideas I've heard so far from my students, right? I think it's a great tool to provide free education to students and to do it in the form of the application. And by the way, you told me there's going to be for the Uzbek nationals who speak Uzbek in particular, right? So that's good. That's one of the market segments that you have already identified. That's good, right? So you started with a very right direction. The first action would be to create an MVP, and this is exactly what you're doing currently, right? This is what I've seen one of your podcasts, and I've seen this is what you said. So you do the MVP. So what you do next is then you test your MVP on who? On your friends, your students, right? All over the world. We have here we have 4,000 students at MDIST alone. That's quite a customer base. You can test each and every student out here and get their feedback on the product. Do they like the usability of the product? This is one of the critical elements, right? It has to be user-friendly. So it has to be intuitive, that customers getting on your platform will not have difficulties browsing around and looking for the things they need to find, right? So there's a certain, catalog of things that you can find on your website. It's easily, openable, right? Easily attainable and so forth. So you get their feedback, and based on this feedback, you reiterate. You change your product, you amend features, you add some features, you take out some features, you test again, right? You test again on your customers. 4,000 only at MDIST, but you can go as far as testing other customers and other students and other universities as customers, right? And you, based on the feedback, you reiterate again. You learn something on the way. They might give you some suggestions which could be quite valuable, right? Based on the way they use the product. Not only that you get their feedback, but you observe how they use the product. You sit around and look. How do companies do that sometimes? They call out the customer groups for the interviews or for the discussions. They get them the table and get the products into the hands. And instead of just looking and listening to their feedback, but instead of listening to their feedback, they're observing how customers interact with the product. So this is exactly what you do. You call up, like in the same room, you call up like 20 students, right? You give them the smartphones, so everyone has the smartphones now. You open up the application for them, right? And you tell them, go play with the application, like look up whatever you like, and you observe how they're doing it. Some people might get frustrated because they can't find things, and you ask them what's wrong, how can we help? And then you get this information and try to change your product accordingly, right? To accommodate to their needs more. Maybe they will say, well, this is good, but you haven't included this particular area of interest of us, and this and that and that, right? You get their feedback. And finally, you get the best product out there, and you create an MVP. That's great. You're a quarter yourself. So basically 90% of the task is there, right? And the only thing that is lacking is the market side, basically. And you can get the validation through access. It's a learning platform, which is very good. Your market base is here at MDIST itself, right? And getting validation, you have the product, you build it, you tune it, and then you release it to the market. So how would you do it? Would you advertise expensively on the TV? Would you advertise on radio? No. You have the great tools. The social media is here. You have the possibility to advertise at the university itself, right? You have the word of mouth. If people love your product, particularly it is going to be free in the first place, right? So your aims are to monetize a bit later on in the product life cycle, right? So what you do is that free, right? So people, if they love the product, indeed, there will be a word of mouth advertisement for you. No need to go out of the way to specifically spend a lot of money to advertise. No, social media free advertisement that anyone can do, and I'm sure yourself, you can go learn how to do it for free. And then the word of mouth, probably placing a few banners at the university. I'm sure you can strike the deal with the head office. It's not going to be a big problem. So this is how you go about, and then you launch, right? So for your type of project, what's important is to get the large registered user base. Not only the registered users, but engaged users, right? The only way that you will be able to attract advertisement if you get the large engaged user base, right? So for that, you need to engage them. How do you engage users? Basic question, content. It has to be a great content, right? So there has to be a content which attracts students. Podcasts are there, it should be videos, right? It has to be an interactive content. It could be quite different from whatever we have in the marketplace so far. It could be podcasts, right? Different interviews with people of interest to those target audience, right? You can make it in a few other languages, not necessarily just Uzbek, right, that you wanted to focus on, but also Russian. English is a good option as well, right? We have some foreigners who live and study in Uzbekistan, would be of great interest for them as well, right? So it could be more of an educational platform, it could be a community. A great thing about the startups that sometimes they pivot. Have you heard of the word pivot before? It's a great word for the startups. It means that sometimes when startups try to validate their idea, it turns out that idea as it is doesn't work too well. I mean, the customers don't like it, they don't use the product as intended. So the startups, instead of, closing down and considering this a failure, they pivot. Pivoting means changing its strategy or changing the business model somewhat to accommodate a new customer base. So instead of, for example, it could turn out that once you start and launch your product, it could turn out that the major use of your product is not the educational platform, but the students hanging out, getting into the networks, getting connected, trying to make the deals together, discussing the business projects and so forth. So you can make a different use of the platform. It can turn out that actually the customers are making a different use of your product, and this could be quite great. You can then amend your offering to accommodate to this use, right? So instead of just closing down, saying, well, as an educational platform, it doesn't work, it's a failure, you just, pivot a bit. You change your business model and change your probably customer segment, customer offering, and you have a different business model out there. It could also be quite working and quite successful. And then you look what you do with this, right? How would you monetize? The registered users and the engaged users, the more of those engaged users you have, the more advertising companies will be happy to work with you, right? So here, the key is to attract the engaged users is to the content itself and engaging these users. How do you engage them? Through podcasts, right? Through leaving the comments, through interacting in those chat rooms. So probably you want to create a nice interactive chat room there and so forth. So you get their engagements, and this is pretty much it. So basically, you don't need that many people to work for your startup, right? You're the coder yourself. You can monitor and maintain the website, the platform, or you're going to create an app, right? An app. So you can do it yourself, basically, right? The market side, if you need someone from the market side, you can either be your friends, right, that you also attract, or you can learn it yourself. In the beginning, you can just do it solo. But once you see, right, that it's getting going, right, and then you require help, only after that you can think of whoever else you need to hire. But probably so far the market side, right, to get attraction from the customers, right, from the students is one of the most important thing, and getting access to good coding. Basically, if you're a good coder yourself, right, if you can make the product user friendly, you can make it bug free, right? This is what's important here. It's basically it, right? And you can also assure privacy and confidentiality. This is one of the very important things nowadays, right? So this is, you get things going. Okay, what else?
What do you think about technology and IT overall in the future or right now in Uzbekistan and the world?
IT and technology, what do I think about it, right? Okay, well, let's see.
Why you want your son to be a programmer?
Okay, all right. No, I don't really want him to be a programmer. That's the thing. Okay, I do understand, and I do believe that IT is the future, right? So, especially the COVID-19 pandemic has showed it quite, obviously that without the access to digital technologies, no companies can become successful nowadays. And even, in the investment industry, where previously the largest financial institutions have been ruling the marketplace, nowadays we see the digital marketplace have been ruling, right? Even the funny things that yesterday I read the article of the first digital image has been sold for $69 million of one of the Beeple, the artist named Beeple. And the digital image, not the regular painting, but the digital image, it's composition, like a collage of all different photographs, was made into a digital artwork and sold for $69 million. So nowadays, even the art world is changing, right, due to digital technologies. So I believe that no business is going to be ever successful without the proper leverage of IT technologies, right? And the IT technologies is used for a variety of purposes. It's the automation of processes, right, starting for, making things easier, expedited, more efficient through automation. It's the use of AI, artificial intelligence, right? It's going to be all over the place. It's actually quite commonly used nowadays. We just don't pay attention to it. A lot of companies are using AI, right? Whenever we chat to those chatbots, right? Some of them are quite sophisticated, right? It's funny, like when about 5 years ago, when I was having the conversation with the chatbots, I did not even know the AI existed at that moment. Well, probably that it is incorporated into the chatbox. So sometimes I really felt like I was talking to robots, and I would be writing to them, "Are you a robot? Why would you talk like a robot?" I didn't know they were actually the chatbots, right? At that moment, like 5 years ago, it was not that commonly used. So I thought that there should be people, but they actually talk like robots. Like, you ask them a long question, but you get the very, formal answer. And you're like, "Are you robots there? Can you just, interact more like real people?" And actually, these were the robots at the moment. So AI is going to be a thing, right? And obviously it is currently throughout the world, but in Uzbekistan it's going to come eventually, right? A lot of companies are going to exploit it. What else is there? Technology is everywhere, basically, right? So without the proper leverage of technology, no companies is going to be successful. Even the local companies, like many believe that if we're a small shop here in Uzbekistan, right, we can go back without the technology that much, right? We don't need to compete with this international, players. We don't need to compete, with on the basis of technology. But this is not the case nowadays, and the pandemic has showed it, right? The companies are facing quite fierce competition from international, global players due to technology, right? Nowadays, people have access to shopping on the international e-commerce platform. People have access to international educational platforms. No need to go and study in the local universities when you can actually have access to an electronic or whatever they're called, master programs, right? So no need to travel anywhere. Even you could just sit in the comfort of your houses, your room, and study elsewhere, right? So that's a great change there for business. The way we hire people, the digital workforce, right? The way we operate in the companies. So instead of hiring big and renting big offices, lavish buildings, building the cafeterias and coffee machines are there, people are moving to the online platforms, right? To the digital workforce. They hire people who are based elsewhere, geographically dispersed locations, right? They build them. They put them together into the boardroom discussions, even, right, through the use of technology. So there's no need for travel, no need for hiring, large hotel rooms for meetings and so forth. So that there's a lot of implications for business that it's going to be irreversible, right? It's going to go on and on. So any new entrepreneur, any young entrepreneur should understand that no matter how great the idea seems currently, if the idea is not leveraged on technological capabilities, it's going to be outdated. It's going to be incompetitive in a few years, right? So this is why the main task of us as educators now is to teach these young entrepreneurs is how to create the ideas that are actually, competitive in the marketplace, that use the technology, that are innovative, and so forth. Because in many cases, to be honest, what I've researched with my students, right, and many ideas that I've, looked through, I've asked them to list their ideas, to talk about their ideas. In many instances, it's the very similar business model, quite, old school business model, right? You don't get to see very innovative or technology-based ideas here yet. So this is why I do appreciate your idea. This is why I say it's a great one, because it doesn't require large upfront investments, pretty much no investments whatsoever, especially if you're a coder. Because if I would be venturing into this idea myself, for me that would be the large expense, right? To hire a coder who would code this one for me, who would create this platform, an application. I know an application is about $5,000 to create so far, right? Well, depending on what type of application, there could be much more, but starting, right? The starting price is about $5,000. So if I were to hire someone to build this one for me, that would be a cost. But if you're a coder, great, right? So learning IT and digital technology is a great prerequisite tool to succeed nowadays. This is why I was telling you that we're planning to teach our son IT starting from 10, right? Although it seems like young, but we know a lot of examples when these school children of 13 years old in the US have started their own businesses, right? Started their own online companies, websites, had been quite successful. One guy at 15 selling his company for a few $1 million to Yahoo and so forth. A lot of examples like this. So I'm sure learning IT and coding and just dealing with technology is of ultimate importance for anyone who wants to succeed nowadays.
You inspire me to learn more about IT. So you can summarize and finish.
Summarize. Okay. All right. All right. To sum it up. No, hold on. We have to record it. All right. To sum it all up, I would say that the best thing is to validate the idea. This is the first thing we should start from, right? We all think that we have the greatest ideas there, but instead of just, thinking that the idea is great and then committing large resources up front, the way to go about it is to validate the idea, to test it on the customers. And the customers doesn't mean it has to be, going out in the marketplace and selling it to someone, but trying to sell it to your friends, the idea itself. Either building the MVP, minimum viable product, like a small prototype, at least how the product or service will look like, and try to test what your friends, your families, your acquaintances, the students at the university, quite enough of the customer base, 4,000, think about the idea. Test it based on their feedback, reiterate the product, change it, right, based on the feedback and suggestions, offer that again, right? And then based on their feedback again, you change, and finally you build a good product. You have an idea which has been validated and refined. Only after that you can start investing money. You reduce the levels of uncertainty and risk, which is important, right? So that can minimize this risk-associated barriers that entrepreneurs have. We all have, right? Where we're all scared that it's going to be failure, and this is why we don't start. So through this, you get knowledge that, come on, this is working. People love it. It solves problems for the marketplace. So I should do it, right? And then you invest, but you bootstrap. Instead of investing large, you start small, right? As small as you can. Instead of hiring a coder, you befriend a coder. You say, come on, let's do it together. It's going to be a great project. Please do it for me. We'll get returns up front, right? Instead of hiring a marketer, you befriend a marketer. You also get him engaged in your team. Say, let's do it together, okay? You do a market size, I do a coding, technology side, and we do it together, right? So we get the returns up front. You talk to people. Networking is important. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to, connect with people and use them. No, that's not a good networking. Networking is about, talking to people, sharing your ideas, building on your idea based on their suggestions, their expertise, their feedback, and so forth, right? And then reiterating them, moving ahead with your idea, okay? And in terms of discipline, prioritizing. First, getting into something that you love and enjoy doing, because the process is going to include a lot of setbacks and challenges. If you don't enjoy the process, right, you're not going to persevere. Perseverance is important, right? So instead of giving up whenever you face the challenge or an obstacle, you persevere because you enjoy, you want the results there, right? You want the projects to succeed. So first, get into something that you love and truly enjoy doing. Okay, this is the major advice I can give.
Thank you so much.
All right, no worries. Thank you so much for inviting me
Yes,
here.
thank you
I
very much
really
for your
enjoyed
time.
talking.
Yeah, for your sharing knowledge was very useful.